rigged, or tell a crowd that their government's rigged?
It is rigged. It's rigged by lobbyists in Washington. It's rigged by very powerful interests in Washington. Obvious example are drug companies, insurance companies, oil companies. Those kind of powerful interests in Washington are having way too much influence.
Senator, how much stock do you take in polls? We have a recent one that shows you surging ahead of Senator Obama and Senator Clinton when before you were kind of neck and neck.
I think that we're a long way away, and what's going to matter ultimately to caucus goers in Iowa is who's ready to be president and who has a very clear, specific set of plans for America, which is why we've laid out a clear, strong tax reform package today. It's why I've got universal health care, energy, strengthening the middle class, lifting families out of poverty. I mean, all those things are things that I think this country desperately needs, leaving Iraq. This country desperately needs that. That's what works. What works in Iowa with caucus goers is you better be talking about in a serious, specific way what you want to do to be president of the United States. And I'm hopeful that Iowa caucus goers are hearing that.
Senator, you talked about corrupt capitalism. Do you envision the next president being sort of a Teddy Roosevelt trust buster?
Among other things, yeah. I mean, I've already talked about in my administration we will have very vigorous enforcement of the trust law. Maybe necessary in some cases. For example, the extraordinary vertical integration that's taking place in multinational farming operations. There might even need to be some modification of our antitrust laws to make them more effective in stopping some of the abuses that I think of.
So does capitalism need these kinds of corrections?
Capitalism needs them to work. I mean, capital markets, listen, we believe in capitalism. Capitalism is the heart and soul of the American economy. But the capital system has to work in a fair way. And there need to be rules and laws that make certain that it's fair for everybody. And what's happened now, the whole system has been rigged by people who have the power and the money to rig it. And somebody's got to stop them. And that's exactly what I think.
I'm a student here at Grandview College.
Yes.
I was wondering about the rising tuition costs. We're talking about giving a tax break for families that support the school. What about the single student? I work full-time, I go to school full-time.
Sure.
And I get help from student loans, but I also put a lot of the burden on myself. Do you have a plan to give students, not just families, but a little tax relief
Not
on
tax
their tuition?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
Not tax relief, but what I've mentioned it briefly today, and I've talked about it before. I have this college for everyone idea where we cover tuition, but it only applies to the first year. We cover tuition and books for the first year for somebody like you who's working. If you work at least 10 hours a week. And the idea was, and actually I'd love to do it for 4 years, it's just very expensive to do it for 4 years. But for now I'm supposed to do it for 1 year. So that we make sure the first year of college is covered for somebody who's actually working, which is, I think, what we ought to be supporting in this country.
Senator, being a Democrat and talking about raising taxes, even if it is for wealthy Americans, can kind of be a touchy subject. How are you going to answer criticism that would almost surely come when you talk about, ending tax breaks, increasing taxes, even for the wealthy?
Sure. Well, if you run for president, you're going to get criticized for everything. It just goes with the territory. What this proposal I've made today does is it strengthens the ability of middle-class families to take care of their children, to be able to save. There's some clear middle-class tax relief. And it is true that for the highest income taxpayers who make money from their investments, that their taxes under this proposal will go up. They should go up because they're not paying their fair share right now. And so I think actually the net of these two proposals, for example, the middle class tax cuts, I think are paid for by the raising the capital gains rate. And I think there's a net revenue result of about 50 billion a year. So in revenue.
What do you say to critics who say this is just class warfare, or do you think we have class warfare now?
What do I say to critics who say this is class warfare? We have one group of Americans who are doing extraordinarily well because the system's rigged for them. It's that simple. And will they like what I'm saying? Some of them will know it. I'm in that group myself. And this system's not fair to people. I mean, if you have money and you're highly educated in this country, you're well taken care of. The question is, what about everybody else, which is the vast majority of Americans? And somebody needs to express the outrage about what's happening in this country. It's not right. It's not fair. And I intend to express it and express it strongly, and I'm going to do something about it as President of the United States.
Senator, you said something to the effect of we need to be patriotic about other things besides war. Can you elaborate on what do you mean?
Well, there are lots of examples. Energy is a perfect example. I mean, we will never get off our addiction to oil just by innovation and investment. We're going to have to be willing to conserve. And that's going to require Americans to make sacrifice. We have to sacrifice. I mean, we have to take responsibility not just for ourselves, but for our country. So that means driving more fuel-efficient vehicles, conserving in our homes, conserving in our workplaces, doing things that inflict some level of pain, and it requires some sacrifice because it's good for your country. And it'll be good for your country. Over the long term, it'll be good for the world.